you permit the house with the PV system and you don't have to go again. So to get this done, we thought we needed installers, of course, potentially customer aggregators. That could be a group buy program, but something to help in the first cost. Financial partner, which will come up later, utility and local permitting authorities to help streamline those, and home builders to get on board and offer PV as an attractive option. Operation and logistics, training. Quality is so important, and incompetence wastes so much time and money. So training and technical training and business efficiency, just in general, training is so important. Hardware, evolving racking and hardware products so that you reduce on-site labor costs. Standardize and modularize. You know, people have been talking about this for a long time. I think we can still make improvements in this area. Build into new construction, as we talked about before. You know, exempt, reduce, and consolidate inspections. If you've got an installer that's doing something right every single time, reduce the amount of times you inspect. Consolidate inspections. Have the municipalities, the utility, and possibly NYSERDA to get together and agree that we could hire a one-third party to go out one time and do all 3 inspections. Financing. One of the things that came up is create open interstate floating equity fund. A lot of the equity funds are proprietary, so they're linked to either a large installer or a module manufacturer, and they have market power because they go in and, you know, the customer doesn't know, they might be a little bit higher price. They can go in and say, well, you know, you're going to pay $20 a month, but you're going to save $30 a month, and the customer says, great. And the installer who doesn't necessarily have that option goes in and says, well, my system is less expensive, but you got to pay it all at once. So to give those installers access to really good financial mechanisms to offer their customer, we thought might create more competition, lower prices. Standard orders, standard forms and contracts, so you don't have to hire a lawyer every time. And then group orders, and I'm not talking about group orders in terms of customer, I'm talking about installers, smaller installers getting together and getting volume pricing on their components. So that's what we came up with. I'm going to give a shameless plug for my program, which you saw in your package, and that is the PV Balanced System Cost Reduction. The other thing I would suggest is that every group look at innovative ways of lowering the costs and apply to my PON for funding to help them develop this, and then they should be ready by the time you have to apply to the SunShot program.
Excellent. Well, we're going to take questions. If the first team can maybe come up. Yeah, we changed it since I talked to you. Any questions from the audience for the team? We got to grill them, find holes in their thoughts here.
Yeah, unfortunately, Steve had to catch a plane. He's a financial brains.
And it's fine if you don't have any questions. I know, it's 5 o'clock.
It could also be comments, for example, brainstorming.
I actually have a question / comment, and I would kind of address it to everybody. Mark Richardson with New York Light. So a lot of what I'm hearing today seems to be not necessarily solar specific business problems, like efficiency, like bulk purchasing. These are things that other industries have figured out long ago. And when I've discussed with several of the other installers around, permitting, frankly, is not at the top of our list of problems. Permitting is something that the construction industry has dealt with year after year after year. Every day they deal with local jurisdictions. I guess I'm concerned about the idea of simply reducing cost per watt as the ultimate goal, because it could potentially drive quality out of the system. And I'm just wondering if you guys could potentially speak to that concern, or anybody, frankly.
actually, I think consumers are willing to pay for quality if you can define that quality, and you can define why you as an installer should demand a premium price, and same goes for the components.
But isn't that in direct conflict with the objective of reducing the system cost per watt installed price? I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I don't disagree at all, because you can charge for quality.
Yep.
But then your system price is not the lowest dollar per watt, and that affects the average installed cost of the system.
Yeah, and the way I look at it is you've got the band of quality, you know, low quality, high quality. We want to move the whole band down.
Yes. The system is very inefficient, right? I mean, the industry is still very inefficient, and as you pointed out, several other industries have taken that step to remove the inefficiencies, become more efficient by using technology, business process re-engineering, or whatever you want to call it. And if you bring everything down, I mean, I agree with your point, that you still keep the quality, but still remove the inefficiencies and bring the prices down for everybody.
Yes, Elizabeth, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say,
Give her the mic, somebody.
I also think there's a little bit of a difference in terms of just thinking about lowering permitting costs versus standardizing permitting practice. And so I'm not an installer, and I would also be interested to hear from installation companies, but I think a lot of time and effort gets spent. You know, in Massachusetts alone, we have 351 cities and towns, and they all have their own permitting process and permitting fees, and whether you do it online or you have to go there in person, and figuring out how to do that for each of those jurisdictions takes a lot of time and effort. So even if it's just in Massachusetts, we have already identified some sort of best practices for permitting. So even if it's just standardized in more communities, that should reduce the costs associated with permitting, even if it's not the lowest cost option. And moving, you know, to an online permitting platform that could accommodate potential, you know, different pricing, but would at least sort of standardize how you did it.
And I don't disagree that that would be phenomenal. However, this is not a solar-specific problem. The permitting is different for electrical, for building permits, for zoning, it's not a solar-specific problem. So are we asking the solar industry to solve this problem for all of the other industries that deal with it? I mean, are we gonna take all these local AHJs and get them to put their permitting process online just because we want solar to move faster? And I'm not sure that's...
I think you hit the nail on the head as to why that's such a difficult problem, is because everyone's embedded and their permitting systems are for everything. And there are some efforts that are trying to do that. But there are other efforts that are saying, you know, for solar specifically, and a lot of the towns, you know, they're starting to see more and more, but they don't know what to ask for, they don't know what to look for. And so giving them something, a template that they can use makes it easier for them. But there's also the possibility that, you know, it is time to upgrade their system. It is time to upgrade, and this solar may be a catalyst.
And I think you may be able to get some other industry buy-in to help push
That's
that
a good
along.
point. That would be a really good point.
Because I think trying to have solar go at this by themselves is a losing battle.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I totally agree with your statement. A lot of the issues with permitting is common in other industries, and actually one of the SunShot projects that I've been working on is doing a permitting database for the entire solar industry. And we completed a survey of 273 installers. Now what we see is that permitting is not a problem for some, but for the broad bulk of installers, it is a problem. And what we're also seeing that there are some problems that are unique to solar. A lot of the AHJs they just don't understand solar. This is new to them, so they're applying construction rules on solar systems, and it just doesn't fit. Now, I think what we're trying to do is not necessarily carve out, okay, this is solar, because let's face it, solar is just maybe 0.01% of what an AHJ does, right? But I think you're absolutely right. It should be integrated with maybe a larger movement around, hey, let's make local governments more effective in general, solar being part of that larger movement. But I think the other point that Elizabeth brings out is that we are driving down cost. I don't necessarily see it as being incompatible with quality. For the longest time, solar has been just out of reach of most citizens. Now we're just driving costs so it will be in reach. Now, is the goal to get down to $1 per watt? I'm hesitant to say $1 per watt is even needed. I think we could get down to a level where it is affordable. Then we could start talking about quality. And just think about cell phones, right? 20 years ago or 15 years ago, it was pretty expensive. It's still pretty expensive, but there's a lot of differentiation among cell phone providers. So I don't necessarily see it being incompatible, but what we can do, what I think we can all agree upon, is let's try to cut down unnecessary costs. And permitting, to me, has, at least in certain jurisdictions, maybe not in New York, but certain jurisdictions, it is an unnecessary cost.
And just one comment on quality is I think some of this could help the quality. Graciela mentioned, one of the things she mentioned is that a customer doesn't necessarily know if somebody's done a quality job because they don't have that expertise. So how would they know? And education is part of this. Employ tools to give customers more market power. One of the things Vikram's doing is giving the ability for customers to give feedback. But again, there is the concern that customers need to be educated to know if their system's even working. Some people could lose half their system and not even know it. So the customer has to be educated as well.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, we move on. Thank you very much again. Second group. Is this you, Bridget?
That is correct.
Honey badgers. Okay.
Know what that's about? I'll have you talk to James. You can look it up on YouTube later on and you'll see what that means. No, it's not dirty, but it's hilarious.
It's PG-13.
Yeah. My name is Bridget Reagan. I'm a commercial accounts manager with Solar Liberty. We're actually a New York State turnkey contractor, and it's our 10-year anniversary this year. So we've got a lot of experience with all the pros and cons and up to where we are today. So my team is made up of James Hong from Clean Power Finance, as well as Mike Spider from NISO. So the three of us kind of went back and forth, hadn't really had a lot of time to sit down and talk, but through emails and phone calls, came up with a pretty good list, we think. I won't hit on every point probably just for time's sakes. A lot of them are kind of similar to what you just saw, but we all feel strongly that the strategy and customer acquisition is by far the most important quadrant on all four of these. As our friend up there has mentioned, that a lot of those logistics and permitting isn't exactly solar specific, but it is to the strategies and how we get our clientele. And I think being a sales representative is absolutely important to know what you're talking about, be educated, and then you're going to tighten your closing time as well because you've earned their trust. They know you know what you're talking about, and you're not throwing a bunch of lies just to get a contract signed. Targeting clients with green initiatives. Not wasting time on someone that's never going to change their mind. They're a naysayer. They don't care. They don't want to know. And cutting down the time of where your field reps spend the time, or the contractors are involved. Having clientele that have those initiatives in mind already is half the battle almost in a lot of cases, or at least commercially anyway. In addition to that, having multiple locations. One client with multiple sites means one set of contracts, one set of lawyers, as you mentioned. With multiple capacity sites is a way to spread it faster with less dollars. Offering group discounts, whether it's neighborhoods or organizations. I work with a Rotary Club in Buffalo. They all have their own businesses, they have their own neighborhoods, and it's a one-stop presentation for multiple avenues, as well as referral programs. It's always a great way, as we've said all day today, referrals are the best way to spread business. We think a good team would be made up of multiple contractors, and this is something that James and I talked about. If you're going to install 5,000 systems in 1 year, you're going to need some help with that. And so we thought, what if you took a state like New York and divided it into grids, so to speak, which kind of goes into the operational logistics side of our chart. If you had a grid with pre-qualified installers that can handle the work within a certain mile radius, you're cutting down on travel time. We pay our guys, we did a job in Long Island and the overnights were out of control. But so if you could have multiple contractors with design capabilities and a turnkey style, that would cut costs for sure. But that's kind of like a job share. Utility representatives for all the interconnection things we've talked about. ConEd has their own struggles, National Grid has theirs. And so getting someone like that on your team to really understand where you can improve would probably be a good member. NRO, for a lot of obvious reasons, a financial consultant to understand what the financial partner on a PPA needs to see in order for the project to work. You can't go below what they're going to finance. And so that's extremely important to understand as well. No job is a job unless you can finance it. So, and the manufacturing, not for the hard costs, but more for the material logistics. And this kind of goes over the next quadrant of finance and supply chain. What if the smaller guys that group together could also do a just-in-time type shipment where they don't have to warehouse it in the meantime, and they could ship it right to the sites where the modules are going to be allocated right away, or the racking, or things like that. Operation and logistics, permitting, we've talked about it. It can go either way, really. But I think there is a lot of red tape for solar specific across the states. There's utility interconnections, and sometimes it's not, and James and I were just talking, sometimes it's not the process, it's the person at the other end of the phone that you're trying to get approval for, and for whatever reason that one person is giving you a difficult time. Inspectors like to do that. Maybe just as an industry to get a little calmer and nicer and play in the sandbox would be helpful. The one thing that we do as an installer is constantly try to find materials and products that lessen our install time. And one of our racking solutions that we use has no tools, and you can ship more in a pallet, and there's less of it when it arrives and has less waste. Maybe find local manufacturers for where you are. Find the local manufacturers, and you have less travel times, which means less freight, less gas, and so on. Some of the finance and supply chain, I talked to one of our analytical guys in our office, and he said that one of the things that they learn in school is every time you write a check, it's $75. So if you could automate your billing and streamline your invoicing, that could probably save quite a bit of cash flow internally in your overhead. We have an operations project manager that's dedicated to making sure the right stuff gets on the right truck for the right job, because we don't want to be walking around Home Depot on a prevailing wage job if we don't have the right stuff, and that's kind of our fault. So having someone in place that can do those things also helps have a little less room for error. And that's more specific on the install, because that's what we do. But I kind of jumped around the quads a little bit. I really urge you to look up the honey badgers on YouTube. Are you doing it right now? Do you want to stream it up here? It's a great thing, you'll see why. So that's kind of all for me. So hopefully I said a couple things that haven't been hammered to death. Any questions? Do you want us to sit up there?
Yes, why don't you go ahead.
Sure, I'll see you.
Questions? Comments? Concerns? Problems with honey badgers? Nothing? I have a question to get it started. So you talked about obviously educating the customer and getting the customer, focusing on the target customer. I thought we had a pretty good talk earlier this morning from Richard Kaufman, who talked about the customer, the Febreze example that he gave was right on, I think, in terms of really segmenting the customer and being able to figure out which customer is going to, be will be bought on the product based on their needs and requirements. No comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think education is absolutely key. We have a lot of people that it's the first time they've even looked into it, and you search a name, and maybe we come up first and we're the first call, so they don't know anything about it. I think, like he said this morning, trying not to confuse, and I think actually you said, James, to sell on the solar first and figure out the finances later
like to add, like
Yeah.
segmentation it's absolutely important. The industry has always been more focused on hardware, lowering the cost, but if you recall from my presentation, to me, it really starts with the customer. If you lower the cost to even $1 per watt, if the customers are not interested, then we don't have an industry, right? So we need to do more research on the customer. What's important to them? That would address some of the issues raised about cost versus value, because there are some customers who value certain things more and will pay a premium for that. I cited some examples, like the guy who wants to stick it to the utilities, and that's a segment right there. There are certainly other segments who, yeah, we often think about green segments, and we identify as being more of a liberal cause, but actually I know, for example, there's a lot of conservatives who go solar. Part of it is they believe in that feeling of independence in general, and they don't want to be it's the Western conservatism of libertarianism. That's what they see it as, free competition. So that's a different type of segment. We don't understand as the industry. In most industries, when you're trying to push a technology, there's always a big player that will fund some type of research. But unfortunately, our industry is very fragmented, so there is not that big player that can fund that research. When, like, for example, Toyota launches Prius, they have the resources to do that consumer research. The flip side is the Department of Energy has funded, I forgot, on the order of like $7 million on multiple research projects. Unfortunately, we have the privilege to participate in with NREL to do this type of research. But there's another group at Yale University doing the research, a group with Texas. And the idea is to inform precisely what you're talking about. What are the segments? What are the barriers to adoption per segment? And what does the industry need to overcome those barriers? And then that becomes more of a value play rather than a cost play.
It's a fine balance.
I have another related question, but slightly different. As a consumer, if I want to buy a solar panel or solar system for my house, it's very different when because I know about it, it's a little different, but I'm talking about a generic consumer that knows very little about solar, right? I'm comparing it to if I'm trying to buy another product. So for example, if I go to buy a car, I know that if I buy a Honda or a Toyota or whatever I decide to buy, the brand is basically what's backing up the reputation, the quality, and everything else. Same thing with furnace for home. I'm going and buying a Lennox or a Train or whatever furnace that's branded as far as that component of the system is all about. We don't have that in the solar industry. Right now it's the installer. So it's like, Solar Liberty, but there's no brand image related to the product. How is that a problem? Is that an issue? Can that change? And will that affect buying behavior?
I think that depends on the sales rep as well. I tend to, as a company, we have a common message. Maybe it's not a module manufacturer, but it's American-made Tier 1. There's efficiency differences slightly, but with the exception of SunPower, they're all kind of in the same, so as long as, they have those qualities that a lot of my customers care that they're American-made. They care that they have a 25-year warranty. They care that we can get them when we need them. And so keeping multiple relationships. And there's ways to address that concern. Commercially, I don't see a lot of my customers caring so much what kind of modules we use. Residentially, they care very much.
Well, because they're not aware.
Correct.
Yeah, I feel like
That's just me.
I think the brand will having a household brand will certainly help. There's no doubt about it. It gives credibility to the industry. Now, is it a requisite for broad solar adoption? I'm not convinced that's the case. If you look at what solar is, a lot of it is construction related. And if you could ask anybody, what's the top construction company in the United States, most of us will have a difficult time naming that company. So, I think you need credible players to establish that presence, but I don't see it necessarily being one dominant player. dominating the solar installation market, because at the end of the day, a lot of it is very local, and it'd be very hard to have a dominant player doing a lot of these local installations.
Unless you have something like Solar City, right, which is a well-known name right now, it's branded and people know about them.
Sure.
I'm surprised you're not saying anything, Felix.
I'm listening.
No, and I actually,
That would be the exception.
I actually appreciate what Solar City is doing. They are expanding the market for the rest of us. They're increasing awareness among consumers, and that expands the pie. By expanding the pie, it makes it easier for the rest of us to sell solar to consumers. So yeah, I think having some type of market leader is important. That is it going to be one dominant player that's going to control the entire solar industry? I don't think so.
Well, they would like to, though.
No, so
I'm sure they would like to.
So I'll add some color. So I think in one of your slides, you were talking about the referral being the most valuable and probably the most repeatable. So you start from that premise, then the customer experience and the branding of that customer experience is paramount.
Yeah.
And that's what Solar City has tried to do. With a single image and a single philosophy, try to brand the whole experience so that it's easily repeatable, and so that the experience that one customer gets is exactly the same experience that the other customer gets. And that adds velocity to the sales.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're not a solar city, but we are the largest in New York.
Sure,
We-
sure.
We feel that we have a brand behind what we do, and our references absolutely speak for themselves, residentially, commercially.
Yeah, and the other point I wanted to drive in the slides was that I totally appreciate what Solar City is doing, and I think that's what's helping the industry. Is that by creating more awareness in general, and I don't think installers are necessary. You can see it as competing against Solar City, but I see it as, hey, we're all in it together to compete against the utilities or the traditional ways of using electricity. And that's why I appreciate that Solar City is leading the way, creating a good experience so that it makes it easier for other people as well to sell solar to other homeowners.
Can I ask a question? In this slide and the prior slide, I don't think it was mentioned, but notoriously is absent is access to tax equity.
Access to
Tax equity
tax equity.
for financing projects.
Yeah.
So the fact that, was that not there for a reason?
Well, the slide was unclear
out of
what
room.
financing really meant, but
Not enough
you're
space,
absolutely right.
but yeah.
In the current world, having access to tax equity, I mean, we know too, is extremely important. But the way I think it worked out, it was almost like supply chain financing. That's how we interpret
Like
it.
saving costs, like not having to warehouse. Or
Not having to warehouse, not having to buy things on credit from panel manufacturers.
But
And we
the-
did have create a open floating
Right.
fund.
The other one, you're right.
But I think that's an excellent point. I think one of the solar is a product that requires a significant upfront cost, whose benefit is accrued over time. And when you see a product like that, I worked at GE Capital, and that's ripe for financing. Any product where there's upfront cost but utility over time, that's financing. Unfortunately, in our current world, there's not a lot of project financing capital available, and a lot of it is through tax equity. And so having access to tax equity is extremely important. But hopefully we can broaden it beyond just tax equity into debt financing or other type of financing as well. But in the current world, it is access to tax equity.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, we're gonna check out honey badgers. Thank you. Next we have Jen from Fraunhofer.
We're from Team Massachusetts. There's two of us, Elizabeth Kennedy from MassEC and myself from Fraunhofer, USA for the Center for Sustainable Energy Systems. Congratulations for staying to the end. So as a reward, I can tell you how to win the prize, right? So this is what I'm going to do. My past life before Fraunhofer, I was actually a product manager over at Satcom Power Systems. So hold your tomatoes. But 3 years ago, I found myself in Spain, where we were installing a solar system on Opal for GM's Opal plant. It was a 10 megawatt system on the roof using unisolar panels. And the financing there for that plant was based on DC capacity and not really AC capacity. So as a result, they ended up putting unisolar panels wherever they possibly could on this roof, including underneath standing water from a what do you call it, the air handler systems up on the roof. So you have people actually putting unisolar panels underwater. Fast forward 3 months later, I'm in Germany, where the locals are so enthusiastic about solar, they're installing 3 megawatts in the middle of the woods underneath the transmission line and on a site that absolutely has no 100% or no unshaded time of day. There's always shading on the site. A year later, we're installing a 40 megawatt site in China, where the Chinese government just granted half of a mountainside. In 4 weeks, they clear-cut a mountainside, terraced it, and put solar 40 megawatts interconnected in 4 weeks. And then a year after that, or last year, we were in India selling 20 megawatts of solar into northern India, and they had taken the workforce, and the workforce were actually sleeping and living in our boxes that we shipped the equipment to, right? So if you want to get the cheap solar, the answer is Chinese government, right? Chinese government mandates, right? An India-style labor force, Spanish finance models, and German enthusiasm. You're welcome. So Elizabeth and I put together our slides, over the past couple of days, and I think everyone, the other teams had some great brainstorming points and stuff that we don't have on here, which is fine. I think the one piece that we really added and talked about in 2 forms was the kind of interlay and overlay of AHJs and utilities. I think Terry, when he spoke about National Grid and talking about load pockets, that's a really important feature to know about, because that's going to be able to have you work with the utilities to streamline the interconnection process. If you can get a utility partner and marry that up with, which AHJs out there have easy permit process, you're going to target the low-hanging fruit first. And if you can do that, then you can kind of breed from nearby residences and towns and AHJs from there, from that perspective. And I don't think that was really touched upon, is the overlay of those 2 independent systems. And then we also brought up the education part of that, which is also a pretty big piece, and through the Solarize program is already taking effect in our areas. But seeing that expanded would also be great. And I think, the other things that were talked about is like streamlining and standardizing on equipment. That's kind of a no-brainer. Like you almost even in a competitive sense to talk to your competitors and streamline on it so you can get the best cost out of the system. The discussion point earlier that was brought up about, the SunShot goal being $1 per watt or $1.50 a watt residence, and the question about quality that comes out of that, it's important, and I think it's correct that the phrasing of it is almost like, well, if I can reduce all the cost and quality, why wouldn't I do that? It's still, some of the slides earlier it presented, there is a documented $3 gap between Germany and the US, and it's just in soft costs. So there's clearly a big piece of the apple we can get rid of here in the US. We can go through pieces of these, but we basically called out, utility partners and friendly AHJs. Specialized contract labor, it'd be interesting if you could set up a model where you're going into an area and you're targeting specifically in that area to do the construction in phases with specialized teams. You have one guy going in doing, job X, you have another guy going in doing job Y, and they just roll through the neighborhood and take care of all the construction and building parts. That would be an interesting thing to see how that would work out from a financing model if that reduced costs. I don't know what else to add. So, that's good.
I was just gonna, the only other thing that I would add, talking about sort of overlaying data, one thing that, we've seen done in cities in California and some other places, but in Massachusetts, we are starting to look at the idea of solar mapping. The city of Cambridge has, there are some municipalities in Massachusetts that have already sort of started down that path, but at the Mass Clean Energy Center, we're looking at we already have an RFP out on the street to have a consultant develop solar mapping using LiDAR data. So if you can themselves get educated on whether they have feasible sites. That alone, in theory, can cut out some of the sort of desktop analyses that installers have to do. So I think that's another tool that hopefully maybe a state or municipality can help with through a partnership.
If I can add, the City University of
Yeah.
New York did it for New York City, not Westchester yet, but they have done it for New York City. And you can look up your address, look at the roof, and it'll tell you the size of the system. It'll tell you kind of what the payback period would be based on a number of subjects.
Okay, let's thank Team Massachusetts. Questions?
There's just one, on the fast tracking of projects that don't require PE drawings, is that a category in Massachusetts? Because I think in New York, they pretty much all require that.
So Massachusetts got round one funding under the Rooftop Solar Challenge, and one of the things that we are studying is, well, we have studied, we just haven't published the report yet, is whether or not there are sort of categories of building stock that we could say, generally these buildings do need a stamp structural, but typically these buildings do not. So from an educational standpoint, it would help municipalities who, to someone made the point, generally the building departments just don't know enough about solar, and so if we could provide some guidance as to when they would and would not require it, I think that would save a lot of costs.
Yes.
Has anybody kind of broken down the $3 difference between Germany and the United States? It seems to me that, looking at where they're less expensive and figuring out a roadmap to match what they're doing, because Germany is hardly a low-cost labor, country. It has a lot of regulation, a lot of benefits, and so forth for its workforce. So,
Yeah, well, we saw a slide, the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory has a paper that actually details and breaks out some of those costs, and which parts are permitting versus interconnection versus labor. And so that it is understood, although it's almost, the European model, and specifically Germany, is almost like you're not asking for permission like you are in the States, right? In the States, you're asking the utility for permission to interconnect. In there, you're almost informing the utility that you're going to interconnect. It's just a little different mentality that they have with regard to PV. But the details of the cost breakdown are there, and I couldn't cite them.
big difference is permitting, or
Yeah.
is it the financing?
No, it's customer acquisition in 3 categories, which was roughly 57 cents of the $3 increase. And the other big package was this both other and profit margin.
There's also a learning curve aspect too. So the LBL did a rough estimate of what, because they are further along on the solar adoption, so there's a learning curve. So LBL did a simulation. What if we were at that same level of adoption? And they found like the learning curve advantage is about half of what that $3 a watt difference. So if we could move up the learning curves, potentially we could reduce $1.50 right there.
What does that translate in terms of installed capacity?
That's a good question. Anybody have a calculator?
5 or 6 gigawatts. Like 5 or 6 gigawatts.
Yeah.
Per year or in total?
Yeah, Germany typically installs roughly about, last year they did about 6 or 7 gigawatts, I think, right?
Right, yes.
Yep.
Last
So-
3 years.
Right.
I think they're also based on roofing companies, so you got existing roofing skills.
They also, their labor takes about a third the number of hours. So because much of their system is all standardized, it's more of a 3.5K system instead of a 4 or 5, whatever.
Okay. Houses are more consistent size.
Yes, question there.
Elizabeth, for your solarized programs, did you provide any type of general economic analysis for people that might show up for your information sessions to get that stamp of approval, credible analysis before the installers would come in and say, here are all the numbers, to give some kind of general sense?
Yes. Just taking a step back, so for each community that participates in Solarize, the Clean Energy Center, we go out, we do a Solar 101, and we could have, it varies, maybe 60 people up to 250 residents in a room. And we do have all of those customer segments probably in every community meeting. But one of the slides we always present is just sort of a simple financial model for a purchase. And I typically list my assumptions so that a customer understands sort of what to be thinking about. Whether they agree with my assumptions, it's fine. And then using those assumptions, I just do sort of a simple analysis that takes into consideration, tax credits, rebates, SRECs, net metering, just so they become, and we go over all of that in the presentation, but just so they become familiar with the terms, so that when they are sitting down at the table with the installer, it's not completely new to them. And then from a PPA lease perspective, we at least go over sort of generally what a contract might look like, sort of how the deals are structured, so and things to keep in mind when when looking at assumptions for those as well.
Well, that sounds helpful. I'm thinking the data at the City of New York database, we've seen that, and the capacity on the roofs and how helpful it is. I think you attended a Penn Futures event in Philadelphia where SIA had a number of brochures on the table showing up the increase in installations in different states, and we handed out to customers, we're EPC, and having the credibility of a third-party organization showing the growth was helpful and credible. Conversation I had with Vikram earlier this morning is sometimes we'll go through the numbers and clients will say, these numbers look so good, why isn't everybody doing it? And a lot of it's because prices have come down, people are just not aware. And so perhaps more industry literature showing these positive figures, trying to help move the industry away from payback, which we hear so frequently, as opposed to IRR, which is because you have such a long license cycle. But the more literature we would have with some type of support would probably help get people comfortable that these numbers are truly legitimate.
Yes.
I have a couple of comments. So to that, and would anybody else agree that it kind of makes sense to take the educational component away from the individual installers and put it on a broader scale? I mean, that seems like a function that's more doable with an NREL or an ISERTA on a local level or something like that. And you guys have
Well, that's what Massachusetts is doing, right? Solarize, you're doing it at the state level.
Yeah,
the education.
we're trying. I mean, it's a huge undertaking, and I think about every Solar 101 I do and think about how installers have to do that multiple times a day. So I think there is potential for that to happen, and whether you do it on a state level or on a community level.
I mean, I think if you look at your direct competition and you see ads on television, et cetera, for natural gas, and we all remember the clean coal ads, and that's what we're up against as far as education goes. So you have to start thinking at those scales. I mean, one-on-one individual education certainly is important to drive the point home, but if people don't understand conceptually what we're trying to do, I just think that's a bigger issue than individual installers can frankly accomplish on their own.
Good point. Well taken. Yes.
On the programs that you've completed, have you done any focus group studies after the fact, and maybe high-level market segmentation directly from the program participants, what they liked, what they didn't like, what drove them to make a decision one way or the other?
Yes, so we've done, after both iterations of the program, we've done a survey of all customer leads, so whether or not they had feasible sites or ended up actually installing solar. And I would say overall feedback is very positive about the program, so people are having good experiences. I think there's a lot of disappointment from folks that are enthusiastic about it but then don't end up having feasible sites. We haven't done, I would say we probably haven't done, we did try and get at what are year I sat down sort of individually with all installers that participated and tried to get feedback on, is this program beneficial to your company? Sort of where are sort of the sticking points for the companies in being able to participate? And I would say in general, feedback too is positive. So I can tell you more about that offline.
So one thing, I mean, related to that is also coming back to the price as well, thinking about it from a price perspective, where we're talking about 5,000 installations. Trying to build that one home at a time is going to be very difficult. You got to go after the low-hanging fruit. Go after larger communities, new developments. I think the example that Felix showed that Solar City did with Solar Strong, the military housing, for example, where they got 120,000, how many homes was that? I mean, a very large number. I mean, if you can identify pockets of early adopters like that to try and achieve that target, I mean, you basically get rid of all the customer acquisition costs in one shot. Can that be done? Is that allowed as part of the program? That's...
I can't really comment on that.
Okay, but I mean, just as a brainstorming idea, isn't that something that would make better sense? Find those early adopters that are large housing projects like that, Felix. I mean, that was a home run for you guys apparently, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many military housing style opportunities there are. Where I do see big opportunities that are scalable like that will be like community choice aggregations that are going to be increasingly popular, particularly in California. And as we've known, California seems to be a leader, and then other states look at it as like, hey, why aren't we doing the same thing? So pay close attention to what happens in California regarding CCAs. Do some homework on that, because I think that will open up tremendous opportunities, not only in aggregating large quantities, so reducing your cost of acquisition, but also driving public-private partnerships. A lot of these towns have very cheap sources of capital.
I was just going to say that some of these tapping the niche markets may not be quite to the spirit of the prize, just because it may not be as replicable as they're looking for. Whereas maybe that model may be. But just, if there's 5,000 home development out there that adopts these, it's the only one in the world, yeah, that may not be exactly what the prize is trying to accomplish. I think it's meant to be a replicable model elsewhere as well.
Yes.
We need a community net metering law in New York, which we don't have. If we get that, that would be a mechanism to aggregate large quantities.
I understand that is going to be happening soon, though. Does anybody want to comment on that? Is that in the works?
Proposed.
That's in the works.
It's proposed.
Yeah.
It is in the works, right?
It's in the works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We think it's an easy leap because we already have this thing for commercial entities for their properties, so it seems like an easy leap to make it applicable to everybody. And that will enable community solar.
Okay. Okay. Any other comments? Questions? Well, let's thank the final team. I know all of you have had a long day, but really quickly, what I want to do is conclude this workshop. This was the first workshop that we've hosted on behalf of the SunShot program. We intend to do similar workshops again in the future. We have another one that's being planned on the West Coast as well, in California, sometime this year itself. So we want to engage the community over there as well. And what we're going to do is the presentations that were showed today, we will ask the presenters if it's okay to put them up on the website. And then we will let you know when the website is ready for you guys to view. We'll send you an email on that. And then we'll also follow up and stay in touch with other programs and events that we do on behalf of the SunShot and the Prize program. Thank you again, all of you, for coming today. It was a great day.